You're listening to the Be Better Off Show by Kelly+Partners.
Well, welcome to this episode of the Be Better Off Show, where we get great Australians who are interesting and different, doing fantastic things to help you be healthier, wealthier, and wiser. And this morning, I've got my longtime friend and collaborator on the Kelly+Partners brand through his Uberbrand agency, Dan Ratner, to join us. Good morning, Dan.
Good morning, Brett. How are you this morning, mate?
I'm great. I was so looking forward to seeing you because we've got so many business owner clients who are listening to our podcast, and I wanted to get a brand strategy expert on to help them understand more about what they can do in their business with their brand. So why don't we start at the beginning? Where did you grow up, and family backgrounds? What did you study, and how did you find a path to doing brand strategy?
Big questions, Brett. Ones I don't think about that much.
Morning, early on a Friday morning.
That's right. Good morning, Dan. Where did you grow up?
Yeah,
I grew up in Sydney. I'm still stuck in Sydney. I'm actually not in Sydney at the moment, but I grew up in Sydney, stayed in Sydney, and have went through school in Sydney. I studied a few different things early on, a bit like yourself, went on a little bit of a path. The first things that I had in my mind, stuck in my mind, is that I wanted to be an industrial designer. And this is back in the very early 90s, late 80s, I guess. And industrial design was all about the manufacture or creation and design of things. So there was no internet back then. There was no digitization, nothing like that. So the idea about the internet or that idea of things made me think about the human interface or the human relationship with how you sort of work with something like a pen or with a door, and how the actual door handle communicates with you. I found that really interesting, but I wasn't very good at making stuff. So I found out quite quickly that I shouldn't really do that. I should probably get into the word of writing. And I finished with a degree in communications from UTS. So I've got some proper communications and journalistic training, which I didn't think was helpful at all until I started to develop the work that I'm doing now, when I realized that semantics and content and communications is fundamental to the way that we execute what we do. So that's a pen summary of it.
So it's very interesting, isn't it, that you have an interest in one thing, you study something else, and you move through the formative employment experiences. But often people are asked sort of what they learned, but what did you learn from working for other people that helped you think about your approach to employing people around sort of what not to do more than what to do?
Yeah, I think the employment experience that I had, as you probably experienced as well in the early 90s, it was a little bit haphazard. I guess that was the time of the recession that we had to have, right? So work was not that easy to get. And what I ended up doing was I did a lot of short courses. I did a lot of extra study. And it took me a while to finish that degree as well. So I found myself learning skills that I otherwise would have probably not have learned. So one of those skills that I learned was multimedia design. And that got me into probably my first real job outside of, working at the local liquor mart. It got me into a proper job where I was designing interfaces for multimedia products and communications. So I was probably one of the only people that could actually program in Director at that time. So that got me into some pretty interesting places, but I never really loved what I was doing because it wasn't really strategic. It was more design an interface, design something, be a creative. And I tried that on for a while. I worked with lots of different people. I worked with lots of different organizations. I worked with large organizations like the Commonwealth Bank, but I also worked with smaller organizations like a company called ASP Multimedia, which I don't think exists anymore. I ended up at one point working at News Corp as their creative director for a short period of time, where I made the realization that I wasn't such a great designer and that there are much, much better designers than I am around. So I very quickly moved away from what I had been doing for about a decade, which was actual physical design, and started to look at producing and the creation of the actual asset itself. So the management of the creation of that asset. And that sort of moved me towards this idea around strategy. So what did I learn through that process? Well, firstly, I learned what I wasn't really good at and that there were people around me that were much, much better. I learned that what needed to happen was that I needed to work with those people, find ways or pathways to work with those people where they could value what it is that I could bring to a small team, because I also valued what they brought to a small team. And then over time, it was really very much around how we could take what I was doing, which was really strategy, and turn that into really strong briefing. And I guess that's fundamentally where where it's gone from there.
So that's good. So unpack that for our listeners who don't have the background that you have in this area. How should a small business think about brand as opposed to marketing, as opposed to sales? What do you see as the difference, and how should they you hear those terms sort of used interchangeably? How would you sort of advise a small business to think about brand, and what makes it different to marketing and sales?
To me, brand is really about definition. So it's like, who are you? What do you stand for? Why do you do what you do? Why are you different? How do you compete? So it's very much in that space of, I've almost likened it to like the anthropology of the industry, where we sort of come into a situation and we're looking at something and we want to feel our way through it and get a sense of, well, what could it be? Often you're not really sure. And, I come out of meetings with clients where they go, we've sort of lost our way. We're not really sure who and what we are anymore, because certain things happen around them, like the competition changes or the marketplace changes. So that sort of definition becomes looser and a little bit more foggy. So the first thing you need to do with branding is very much around defining who and what you are, why you exist and why you're different. So that's the first part.
That's very interesting, because would it be fair to say, I have the view that virtually all small businesses have a sales function, otherwise they wouldn't exist. They have, to a degree in their mind, a sales and marketing function. I think they tack the word marketing on the end because somebody made a brochure and did maybe a logo at some point that doesn't match the stationery. But brand is like, in my view, a blind spot, where many businesses, to my observation, haven't lost their way. They didn't define their way in the beginning.
Yeah, they sort of accidentally fall into the work. They come
to it, in my estimation, because they're a technically proficient at it. So I dig holes, therefore I'm a hole digger. I do electrics, therefore I'm an electrician. So could you, I have some thoughts about how you unpack that, but how would you think, here's a guy, he's a fantastic electrician. He starts an electrical company. He now has 30 trucks. He knows how to sell. He knows sort of what he sells. He's got a brochure, calls that marketing. How should he be thinking? Like, what would you, from a brand and brand strategy perspective, bring to that small business?
I think what you described is really interesting. Two things you said: he's a great electrician. The other thing you said, he's an electrician. So the first thing we've got to realize is that he's actually operating within a category. And so there is a range of what I call category norms or category expectations, which is electricians know how to put wires together, or that might be, respectful enough, but they know how to do what it is that electricians do. So that's the first thing, which is category. The second thing is, well, how do you navigate through that category? What makes you a great electrician? What moves you from being good to being something that's actually unique and different within the context of that space? Now, you and I have talked about this many times. And there's we talk about what it means to be a great accountant. Yeah. And so people don't really know. And so from a category perspective, people look at electricians in the same way they probably look at their accountant, and they go, no, electrician, I've got a broken light. I've got a problem. I need to get my tax done. I need an accountant. So they go to an accountant. But the subtlety inside this is really defining what it is that makes you different or makes you great at what it is that you do, and then packaging that up and executing that into communications, which is the marketing of it. And then the final piece, which is the convincing, which is sales. So it's sort of three component parts, or three buckets, if you like, of the way that you need to do it. So
just to be very precise, you often hear people call it sales and marketing, when in my estimation, it's brand, marketing, and then sales. But I think this insight around, I always think words tell you a lot. When people say sales and marketing, it tells you the order with which they think about it. And it feels to me sort of reactive, unconsidered, and not in the right order.
Yeah, I agree with you on that point. So
that's sort of things, like right. Observations. I say to people, oh, great. What are you trying to do in your business? I'm trying to do this. Great. How does anyone know that you're different to anything else? And they're like, well, of course I'm different. You ring me, I get there faster. Okay. So they have the kernel of what makes them different. Otherwise, they wouldn't have the business that they have. They wouldn't have a customer. They wouldn't have any sales. They wouldn't have the patronage that they have. They just wouldn't. But it's almost like this unconsciousness as to what it is within themselves as to who they are, why they do what they do, and what specifically it is that they do and who they do it for, why that person chooses them. So, the reticence is, I run a small business, I'm busy. I call that the modern 4-letter word. I'd rather you use the F word than the B word, right?
Yep.
Can they come to you and spend a Saturday and try and start to, to think about how to better understand themselves and their business and how to communicate that? Or, it seems to be this big business thing, brand, and seems quite unapproachable for people.
It's not at all. Let's get back to basics. We talk about a brand, right? Everyone has a brand. Everything is actually branding. So if I break it down to real simple forms, a brand is simply a perception that's held in somebody's mind. That means it's not something we say it is. It's something they think it is. So perceptions, the idea of perceptions, are formed by the accumulation of all the experiences and impressions that a person has with you over time. So that comes to life through what you look like, what you say, and what you do. So that's the first premise. The second premise is that in order to deliver that consistently, you need to have a very strong image about what you want people to think of you, and you need to have an understanding of what they probably think of you today. Everyone has this problem. So everybody thinks about who they are or what they're doing today, which is the busy word. But you really need to get outside that context and go, what is it that you want people to think of you in the future? And how do you close the gap between what they think of you today and what you do want them to think? And closing the gap comes down to how you execute on that brand strategy. So if I break that down or reposition everything I've just said into the conversation we had a minute ago, the brand is the definition of that future state with an understanding of your current state. The marketing is the way in which you execute your communications to bridge that gap. And the sales is the outcome that comes as a consequence of that shift. So if you break those three things into buckets, you need to know where you're going, who you are, why people should do business with you. You need to integrate that into the way that you execute your communications, which means on your website, in your brochure, in your PowerPoint presentation, in your sales patter, in the way you answer your phones, in the way that you turn up, in the way that the livery's on the truck, whatever it might be. And then
and what was the final step?
Sales, which is how do you use all of that to actually create acquisition or conversion at that final point of decision.
Okay, so let's so look, to our listeners, this is ultimately about building your business, growing your sales, and ultimately the profitability and competitiveness, sustainability of your business. I'd like to add there, Dan, there is this tension between who people are and who people want to be, in fact, and then who people are and who they are in other people's minds. And so to me, you've got this sort of triangle of who somebody is, who other people think they are, and who they really are. And closing the gap between sort of who they really are and who they want to be is important for themselves as people and their businesses, and then influencing or communicating more clearly to themselves those things is, in my view, going to give them more opportunity or more likelihood that they're going to be able to convince someone else of that.
Do you remember the first thing that we did 10 years ago was we went out and we spoke to your clients?
Absolutely. So let's share that. I said to Dan, look, we're working on the business. I'm interested. We've attracted a lot of people, a lot of clients. We're in the market. And I want you to go and speak to our partners, our clients, and our employees, our team members, about why it is they come to Kelly+Partners. So can you explain, that was a tremendous process for us. I think it was 10 or 12 years ago, because it gave us an insight into not what we thought the business was, but what other people, but the genuine reasons other people had come to work in our business or to be our clients. Then can you explain to our audience like what that process was, what it was designed to do, and the value that it's delivered?
Yeah. So fundamentally, it goes back to the things I said before. So the perception that's held in their minds is the truth. Perception is reality. What's inside your mind as the leader of an organization, or as a CEO, or as a business owner, is a desire or an aspiration to achieve something. So in order to work out where you were in that process, it's important to stock take people's perceptions. So what we did was we interviewed key people that we thought would have good opinions and good perceptions around the organization. We spoke to clients and customers who had recently come on board. We spoke to ones that had been on board for a while, and we spoke to ones that had left. We also spoke to people that were working inside the organization, and we were speaking to new employees and older employees and partners to get a sense of the whole roundedness of the picture of the organization. We asked questions like, who are they? Why would they come to you? What do they want from an accounting firm? What makes them do? What do they respect in what they're getting? What are the things that they would like to have otherwise? Just giving us a rounded picture of who and what was happening within the organization. And then we use that to test against some of the aspirational points that the manager or the owner of the business had in their mind as well. The process is the same, whether you have 50 people working for your business or you have 5 people working for your business, whether you have 5,000 clients or you have 50 clients. You sort of have to take that stock and understand what is it that people are buying from the organization, and what is it that people are taking from the organization, and what is it that you really want them to do.
Okay, so let's just hold there. So guys, we did this research. Dan and his team independently went and saw clients, former clients, current people, partners, employees, and asked them a series of questions to try and find out the opinion of or to their truth as to why they had come to Kelly+Partners. Now, we found in that research, or Dan found for us, that the reason that people come to Kelly+Partners is because Kelly+Partners has energy and is going somewhere, and they want to go somewhere too. So we got this kernel of truth, this go somewhere idea that, reflected the nature of our people and organization, which was very interesting. But it gave us insight as to then how we could communicate to people, how we could recruit people. Dan, we would say to our team who recruit, I need people that have energy. I need people that want to go somewhere. If they don't want to go somewhere, then they shouldn't come to Kelly+Partners, because our clients are people that want action. They want outcomes. They want to go somewhere.
There's a note in here, right? We've now shifted the conversation from the definition of it, which is the kernel of truth, into the way we communicated it.
Correct. Well, it was even more interesting than that. It was just, it was the truth of why people gravitated towards us. And then to your point, I was then able to say, well, hang on, how can we more clearly communicate in action who we are in fact? Which is very helpful, because often you may have some views of yourself or your organization that maybe you hope are true. Maybe they are true, but they're not the ultimate truth or reason that people gravitate towards you. Most owners know why people buy from them or come to work with them, but they don't necessarily know the number one reason or the number two reason. I've seen you do this many times now, Dan. It's quite interesting. So for any of our listeners out there, I'd highly recommend that if you haven't done that, you do it. And it isn't an email survey. It's face-to-face interviews. It takes time. It's really frustrating if you're me, right? Because it takes time. You got to do it properly, right? You got to get in there and let Dan do his thing and actually talk to actual people, because often people don't tell you their deepest thoughts in a 1 minute, in a 2-second email survey.
Yeah, you can use those methods though. Like, it's not all. There's a whole lot of different methods that you can use to garnish that information out of people. Recently, we've been doing, for our consumer brands, we do groups. So we go and investigate and test things in front of people online using Zoom. We can run groups with people and test ideas and have them respond to stuff, and we get heaps of really interesting learning out of that. But that's the market research element. The next element was taking that kernel of truth and executing that into something that amplifies it. And I think what you've got, in your example, the initial idea around go somewhere translated up into, people that want to take the lift, not the stairs. So just things like, I remember the initial advertising concepts that came out of that, but where it's got to now is better off, which is an articulation of the same thought that still exists and permeates your business, which means we've got a nice sustainable idea, which came out of a kernel of truth through some research that was done a decade ago. And
it's very interesting.
We go back and keep testing this, right?
Yeah.
And it still resonates. And
it's so interesting.
Yeah.
And so look, to share that example, we use it in our recruiting.
Yep.
Right? Because every business, the interaction with your people is going to be important, even if you're an online business, right? The attitude of your people needs to reflect, the values that you ultimately, are proposing that you hold. So from there, we got these advertising concepts. We've never been an organization that's done a ton of advertising, but it informed our imagery that we use on our website, brochures, email signatures, etc. It most particularly reinforced the culture that we're trying to build, the values and behaviors that we encourage. We have an awards function every year, Dan, our annual awards dinner, and we give awards out that are aligned to our values, that are aligned to the insight that we need people that genuinely want to help our clients go somewhere and achieve their goals, do something.
I think there's another point around this, which I think is important to make, especially for your audience, which is this idea of an essence of a brand, which is.
So can you explain that to us, Dan? Like, what is? You hear all these terms. What's a brand essence?
Well, this is the thing. You've just literally described the essence of the organization and how that permeates out. So an essence is almost a summation or a guide or a guiding idea that drives everything that an organization does. It doesn't necessarily turn up as an advertising concept or a tagline or anything like that. It's more of a cultural concept that sort of permeates a business. My favorite essence, to be honest, is Disney's essence. So Disney, which wants to be the world's number one entertainment company, has this brand essence which switches everything on. It makes everything make sense for it. And that essence is magic. And so they take this concept of magic, and magic sprinkles its way through the organization. And from an executional perspective, it turns up as Magic Mountain and Disneyland and everything like that. But from a business choice perspective, it turns up as the things that we do need to be delivered within the context of that magic. So hence you look at their activities and you see the things that align to it. So whether it's hotels that are like, imagine what a Disney hotel would be like, or what Disney shipping lines are about. They all sort of contain this element of magic.
That's very interesting. So, if you can get your brand essence to one or two words that are simple for people to understand, there's a great Harvard business case that says, that's title is, can you say what your strategy is? And the argument is from the professor that if you can't say what your strategy is, and your front desk person and your back desk person and everyone in between doesn't know and can't say in simple terms what your strategy is, then you don't have one. And I think that applies to, can you say what your brand is? If all of your people can't say that your brand is XXX, then it's probably true that if you haven't been able to share internally what your brand is, you've got very little hope of sharing that externally.
True. But to get to it, and we're talking to business owners who have got the B word, you've got to break these things into small, digestible components. You can't eat the elephant in one go, right? So the way that you've got to get to that is by looking at the tension, the market tension, like generally the zeitgeist. What's the problem that the organization exists to solve? So that's the first thing you got to do. Electricians exist to solve an electrical problem. Accounting exists to solve a business problem. So that's the first thing. What is that problem? The second part is, what's your purpose? Why do you exist? Why does the world need your brand? Why does the world need you to solve that problem? So that's purpose. And then from purpose, you can get to strategy, which is, what are you going to do to make that happen? Then you can get to vision, which is what happens as a consequence of all the things that you do every day, which then gets you to what I call brand objectives, which help you inform what will ultimately be that essence, which is a combination or a laddering of attributes, benefits, emotional rewards, personality traits, belief systems, and then a singular idea around an essence. Then we've got what we need to actually work out how would we execute the communication of that, what it looks like, what it says, and what it does. So they're the components of how you actually build a brand strategy.
Yeah, which is great. So like just for anyone who heard that quickly, and I've written it down there, problems to solve, what is the problem your business exists to solve? What's your purpose? Why do you exist? What's the strategy? What are you going to do? What's the vision? What are your objectives? What's the big essence idea? And number 7, execute. How are you going to execute? So for a company that wants to go on that journey, Dan, and that is what we've just now described as a big fat elephant. How do they break that down? I'm a bull in a china shop in the sense that I believe, and potentially wrongly, that you should go very hard through those 7 steps to get an initial brain dump of, who you are, who you think you are, what you've got internally, your old brochures, blah, 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 where you've been, what you've done, sort of throw that on the table.
Yep.
And then I know our process was we got you guys to go and research to try and bring some independent view as to what is the truth of what we're doing and what we think, and are we thinking straight? And look, in fairness, I hate the word busy, but I acknowledge that it is a reality. We've got businesses, children, partners, life to live, and we are, in fact, I like to say, under a lot of demand rather than busy. We have a lot of demands on our time.
This would help simplify a lot of that time.
Well, that's what I argue. Like, we did the exercise, we did the stuff, we did the research.
Yeah,
and we threw it to you.
You've got the capacity to scale up communication. What I wanted to say about tension, which is probably what you're describing, which is where this information gathering takes place, which sounds like a lot of work. But really what it comes down to is value proposition, which is what is your proposition to your marketplace? What's the offer? To get to that offer, you need to you double click on the tension and you look at who's the customer, or who is actually the audience that you're trying to have an effect on? What's going on in their world? What's the big marketplace problem that's happening in their world? What's happening? And then what other options do they have? And then why are you different? Why should they choose you? So if you go through that process, you can get through that research. So talk to your customers, look at what's happening in the marketplace, look at what's happening in your competitive space, and try and understand what it is that makes you different. And within that, you'll get your proposition, which is tension and purpose. They'll drop out of it. That's our process. We ran through
how hard? Yeah. So how hard, Dan, is that? Like, if I was to have from this podcast a group of clients that were interested in running that process, can we throw them in a room with their helper or marketing person or whatever that they may or may not have in their business? And can we run that process over half a day or a day for 25 businesses at once? Or how scalable is it for people to get to a place where they understand the process? Because mostly what I see is a lack of understanding that this stuff even exists and the difference that it could make. But often when I've been able to sit down with clients and just say, hey, if you thought about it like this could make a real difference, I've got a fair bit of traction, but then they're not quite sure how much time they've got to do anything about that.
It'd be interesting to see if we could scale the process to up to 25 people in a room around desks with some facilitation. I think it could work. I don't think this is rocket science. I just think it's logical thinking. So what you look at, the discipline itself is around what is it I'm looking at? Like, am I looking at an attribute, or am I looking at a feature? Am I looking at a benefit? What exactly am I looking at? And then it's really around what I call like pigeonholing. So we could probably do it in a scaled format and see what happens. And people would come out of it at least with something, or some knowledge or some experience or some way of learning how they should be thinking about brand and how that brand could inform what they might then say. So yeah, we could try that. Alternatively, it's really a case of workshopping one by one by one. We had one of those workshops this week, didn't we, Brett? We did, and
like, I want to share that in that, we would consider as an organization, a small business, that we have a deepened and sophisticated understanding of our brand. and we've got a track record of executing on it. But that doesn't mean that I don't ring down on Saturdays and say, listen, big fella, you're going to have to get in here next week so we can run another session, because we're thinking about the next 5 years of the business and we value your insight. Bring your team and let's sort of muck through it again. Because I think if you've got a business, any business, and if you regard your business as decent in any way, you should consider that your business is evolving and developing, and that you need to, from time to time, just check that you're sailing in the direction that you think you are.
Definitely. And I think one of the observations I've got around that session is that the fundamentals that we defined a decade ago have still continued to permeate through the strategy. There are some immovable objects in there now, and I really respect that. And I think that's great. And I find this really interesting, because those immovable objects, those defined stones, if you like, the foundations of that strategy, continue to permeate regardless of how the market has changed and regardless of how the business has changed. I find that really, really interesting as well. So
I think that if you get the essence right, what I love about the idea of brand essence is that if the brand essence is tied to, enduring values that resonate with real people, and that those people that are your clients and the people that you want in the business to help those clients align, it's likely, even if the market shifts in some way, that people's values are relatively universal for the long term. And so that essence, I love Nike, right? Just do it. Their essence is that they celebrate athletic performance, whether it's an Olympian or a person getting up early to walk around the block.
That's the execution of their essence. The essence is authentic athletic performance. So
that's right.
So the execution of an authentic athletic performance becomes just do it, which then goes into a communication or marketing, which is let's celebrate performance.
Yeah. So that's great, right? And you can see that over 40 years, that essence of, I call it celebrating, right? Of celebrating athletic performance, whether it's an Olympian or otherwise. When you think about the 100-year vision for that brand, that is an essence that you can take to market forever and everywhere, which is incredibly powerful. And when we look at these great brands, I guess, they create real value in businesses. Now, for our clients and others that are listening, they, in particular, make it easier for those organizations to attract like-minded, outstanding people. And in a world where it's difficult to attract great people, that is an enormous assistance. And I think most often overlooked, the role that brand plays in recruitment is hugely important, because the people that you recruit ultimately deliver the brand to your clients. And so often people think of brand as an outside thing, but I think of it as an inside thing. And then for your clients, brands build loyalty, they build value, they build margin, and they build a relationship that ultimately lasts a lot longer, which makes that relationship more valuable. So, I really couldn't speak highly enough of the role that Dan and his organization have played in our business. I hope today's chat just whets your appetite, because, I deliberately keep these podcasts to 40 minutes because I believe anything longer, people are under a lot of demands for their time.
Can't say that word.
That's right. That word I like to pause on. And I just hope and would urge you to be in touch, contact Dan. We will run a brand day, in this discussion, what we did this week. Dan, I'll get with you and we'll pick a date, and I'll send it out to all the clients and say, if you want to run it, we'll run a brand day. You can put some money in a pot and we'll put it on all together. And let's see if we can get some people in the room and at scale help people to think further about their business. I guess my final comment is that great quote from Henry Ford, where he says that thinking is the hardest work, and that's why very few people do any of it. I know that our clients who run businesses are always thinking about their business, and I just absolutely recommend your structured process for helping them to think more clearly and give them a platform for action that I know will add value.
Yep.
So, Dan, I want to thank you for coming on today, for sharing your story and your thoughts. We've done great work together that I value tremendously, and I've loved watching your development personally and in your business. And I'm looking forward to getting a bunch of people together to benefit from your work.
Yeah, it'd be very interesting. I think we've got a system, and those systems work. As you know, systems work. And so if we can apply that system at scale and help more people to define who they are, what they do, and why people should do business with them, then I'm all for it. It'd be awesome.
It'd be good fun. It'd be great fun. So there you go. That's what's come out of this morning. We're going to run a Kelly+Partners brand day. And, I'm told the economy is challenging, and I believe it is. I also believe in that quote, don't ask things to get easier, demand that you get better. And there's an opportunity in this space for all of us to get better.
That's an absolutely true point there, Brett. I think there will be a flight to quality. I think it has been a little bit easy from a marketing perspective, and now differentiation and definition around that and quality around your execution and communication has to come back into the fore, because as we get more competitive, people will be looking at why they should do business with you, why they should choose.
Yeah, it's a good point. Well, as I like to say at the end of one of these sessions, have a great day.
Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Be Better Off Show. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to rate and review on Apple Podcasts.
Have a great day.